Hi, this is Brian Glass. I'm an attorney in Fairfax, Virginia, and I've got Kevin Ward here with me. He's a chiropractor at Ward Chiropractic and Rehabilitation. He's got an office in University Mall right across the street from George Mason. And today we're talking about myths and things that people believe about auto accidents and injuries and chiropractors and lawyers. We got a number of things to talk about. So the first thing that I always hear from insurance adjusters is that if it's not a big crash, somebody cannot have been hurt. Is that true in your experience?
Definitely not. That's not true in my experience. By the way, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. So the question was, just because it's not a big crash, does that mean there's no injuries? Is that correct?
Right.
So if you think about it, the areas in your body that are going to be injured, like your neck or your back or any type of joint, that's a very small area compared to a vehicle. So even if you have a large vehicle moving slowly, that can still have a big impact on these relatively small body parts that can be injured.
Mm-hmm. And so here's the analogy that I use with jurors, right?
Okay.
I mean, when was the last time you bought a carton of eggs and didn't open it up and look inside?
Good point.
Right?
Never,
I mean,
never.
Even if you can't see anything on the outside, it doesn't mean that there's no damage on the inside of the carton, right?
Right. No doubt.
And then conversely, if somebody's in a big crash, does that always equal an injury, number one? And does it always equal a bigger injury than somebody's in a low velocity crash?
No is the answer to that. So I've had people that have been in injuries where their vehicle's totaled, airbags deployed, they've rolled over, and they have relatively minor injuries versus people that, they get rear-ended by another vehicle traveling at a relatively slow speed. Mm-hmm. And the latter case, the injuries are more severe. So there's just a lot of different variables we have to consider. And while you might think on the face of it, it would be correlated to the amount of damage in an accident, it's not necessarily the case.
Doctor, in addition to dealing with the muscles in the neck and the back, you also deal with some of the nerves, right?
Absolutely we do. So the spine houses your spinal cord, and from your spinal cord exits all the nerves that innervate your entire body.
And so if I had an injury to the cord, I might not have neck pain, but I might have maybe numbness or tingling into my hands or my feet. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, definitely. So, so the injury, so you have the spine, which houses the spinal cord, and then exiting from that cord are different, we call them spinal nerve roots, and those feed the rest of your body. So this isn't exactly a anatomically correct analogy, but I'll use it. I sometimes describe it like stepping on a garden hose. So if you have an injury like in the neck and that nerve is being irritated or in some cases pinched, it's kind of like stepping on a garden hose, meaning it can affect the area in the neck or the back or anywhere downstream of that area. So for example, a neck problem can affect the shoulder, arm, even into the hand. A low back problem can affect the low back, of course, the hip, the knee, or sometimes we'll see radiation, numbness, tingling, all the way into the foot.
And so the treatment that you would provide for injuries down into the upper and lower extremities would actually be to the neck or to the back?
Yes, depending on if the origin is from the neck or the back.
Right,
of course. There are, of course, like other injuries. For example, if you're holding the steering wheel hard in an accident, you might injure your wrist, which would be a separate injury from a neck issue. But we'll figure out where the problem's coming from, and that's really key to effective treatment.
So one of the things that I hear a lot from auto accident adjusters is that bracing makes a difference, right? They'll look at your notes and they'll say, well, he says he was braced for the accident, so he couldn't have been that hurt. Or they'll say he never saw the crash coming, and so he couldn't have been that hurt. Does whether I'm holding onto the steering wheel and looking in my rear view and seeing somebody barreling down on me, does that impact the way that my body gets treated in a crash?
Yeah, it does impact the way your body gets treated in a crash. So one thing you can kind of think about is, if you've done any kind of contact sports or anything like that, a lot of times, like, I'm not a football expert, but when you're tackling,
Not as a Penn State guy.
No, I'm not a football expert, but in a lot of these contact sports, you want to be somewhat relaxed when you're going through a tackling motion or like a takedown motion, and the reason for that is your body in some cases is less susceptible to injury if you're actually relaxed, and if you're super tight and all the muscles and soft tissues around the joint are contracted, that can actually cause a worse injury. But again, with these types of problems, there's lots of variables, like you mentioned, looking in the rear view mirror. If you're looking in an awkward direction when you get hit, depending on what side you get hit from, that can all play a role in the extent of the injuries.
So, Dr. Ward, another objection that I get a lot of times from insurance adjusters is that if somebody either goes to the emergency room on the day of the crash, or if they don't, but then a week or 10 days or 2 weeks goes by before they see you or sees another doctor, the insurance adjuster will look at that and say, well, there's a gap in the treatment, and he couldn't have been hurt from this crash, or he must have been hurt somewhere else. Can you talk about how the length of time from crash to seeing you impacts how you evaluate a case?
Absolutely, yeah. So we see that all the time as well. And I will just sort of as a public service announcement, I'll say that if you're injured, whether it's in an auto accident or any type of injury really, it's to your advantage to get evaluated and treated as quickly as possible, because the longer that injury hangs around, the longer it typically takes to recover. So that's just sort of an aside.
Right.
If I see someone that has back pain and they just got it from starting their lawnmower yesterday, that's going to be a much faster resolution typically than someone that has had it for 30 years.
So the length of time that it takes them to get in to see a doctor is inversely related to the amount of time that it might take them to recover.
Right. Yeah, you're challenging me a little bit with those big words, but yeah, that is correct. Yeah, so inversely related, I would say, is correct. So regarding your initial question about gaps from starting treatment. Yeah, so what happens with a lot of these cases is you're in an auto accident, your nervous system's on overdrive, you've got a lot of adrenaline in your system, you're dealing with insurance companies, you're making sure everybody's all right, you're dealing with maybe law enforcement, paramedics, and you're basically super hyped up. And because of that, a lot of the pain suppressing hormones and aspects of your physiology can suppress the pain initially. And that's why you'll often hear people don't feel pain maybe initially right after the accident, but 24, 48 hours afterwards they do start to feel pain, or even potentially later than that. Now, then what happens is a lot of people, even if they do have pain, they say, okay, well, I'm just going to wait to see if this goes away on its own, which is a problem because of what we said first, right? But it's not unusual for someone to get in an accident. They feel pretty good for the first, 24, 48 hours, and they start to have pain, and then they think, well, this will go away on its own, or I'll just take some whatever over-the-counter medication, it'll go away. And then 2-3 weeks later, they're still having the pain, and then they seek treatment. So,
and what about gaps in the middle of the treatment? Do you have patients that are feeling better and then they stop coming to see you, and then they have an increase in the pain and come back?
Yeah, that does definitely happen. So in our office, we do try to make sure people have returned to full function before releasing them from an accident, which is why at the end of a course of treatment, we usually do what's called a therapeutic withdrawal from treatment, where we're basically slowly increasing the intervals of time between treatments to make sure that you can do everything you need to do in life without having an issue. So we want to see you get back to all your activities and whatnot before you're completely released from treatment. But there are cases where, everything is feeling 100%, things are feeling good. We release you from active treatment, and then, you go and Could be something small, could be something big, but you do an activity of daily living and the pain comes back, and then we'll resume treatment at that time.
Something like lifting a heavy box that you otherwise would be able to do.
No doubt.
But because you've got some structural inefficiencies or some muscular problems in your back, now it's harder for you to do and it causes pain, right?
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yep.